If you want to watch exclusive Naruto Lemon, then you should go to my boosty. Now there is a 20% discount on 3 level, which is in the description under the video. What will happen if the quarrelsome girl, always going ahead, finally breaking free from everyone's hatred and contempt, returns to the very beginning? What will happen if this girl's best friend, sealed within her since birth, also returns with her? Chapters 47 to 48. The last 2 chapters will be on my boosty absolutely free. Enjoy watching. Chapter 47, Final. Let's start the last 10th match. Hade cleared his throat and said loudly, interrupting all extraneous conversations, looking with a stern look at the genin and their mentors standing on the balcony. Participants to the arena, he said briskly, with a casual gesture indicating that the last pair of rivals should take their places next to him. Naruto, whom Kankuro had just literally handed over from hand to Minato with a slightly floating consciousness, could only smile warmly at some unusual, too serious, or something, Chuji, confidently passing by her. But even if she wanted to do another thing, the girl simply didn't have the strength left for anything more, so, relaxing slightly in her father's strong arms, Naruto settled down more comfortably right next to the railing, wanting to at least watch her friend's upcoming battle. The 10th battle begins. As soon as the opponents were opposite each other, the examiner said loudly, immediately moving to the side closer to the very edge of the arena, which was noticeably battered by previous participants. Screams and furious whistles immediately rained down from Naru on all sides, encouraging Chuji, which incited her opponents even more, but the girl only sighed heavily, remembering perfectly well how exactly this short battle would end. However, Akimichi still had one option that could give him a real chance to win. The kunoichi just had to give Chuji the idea of a sound wave, and the accompanying vibration that passes through any, even the hardest bodies, causing damage their structure. But firstly, the girl didn't even see how that damned Dosa fought during the second stage of their exam, so such good knowledge of his abilities would look extremely strange on her part. Secondly, if we take into account his blow before the first stage, it looked more like an attempt to inflict the most banal physical damage on her. And thirdly, which was practically the decisive factor for her, Naruto was not 100% sure whether Akimichi needed to seriously fight one-on-one with this scary guy for the right to get into the next stage, because then, unlike last time, everything definitely could have ended extremely badly for him. Do you think he has no chance? Shika said to Naruto's left with a frown, while at the same time constantly looking at the arena, where Chuji was saying something restrained to the opponent who was clearly mocking him, slightly surprising his friend with his question. She naively decided that, completely carried away by the last battle, no one would notice her sigh and sad look, not at all. In confirmation of her words, shaking her head negatively, the kunoichi quietly responded, now speaking the true truth. At the same time, only at this moment clearly feeling how strength was gradually returning to her bit by bit, as if the father, who was still squeezing her shoulders, was sharing them with his daughter. If Chuji understands that the whole point of this creeping reptile's technique is not in the sound, but in the vibration that accompanies it, then, most likely, he will be able to win. She blurted out a little more cheerfully, for some reason explaining her strange answer to the heir of the Nara clan, while at the same time feeling his surprised gaze on her. However, knowing Shikamaru well, he most likely guessed about it himself, because he simply could not help but notice some discrepancy between the damage and the attack itself during their short battle with the genin from the Hidden Sound village. The only question was why he himself didn't tell his best friend about this, either in Naruto's past life or in this one. I told him. Her childhood friend whispered quietly, in a very strange tone, literally forcing the girl to perk up and, glancing briefly at him with a stunned gaze, stare more carefully at the arena, where Chuji's fight was about to begin, completely different from the last time, how and her own. Although, you know, Naru, if I hadn't been so scared for the skin of one blonde splinter, when this freak attacked her before the first stage in front of everyone, immediately attacking with his trump card. Shikamaru grinned nervously, clearly hinting that it was then that I thought about the very essence of the technique and all the possible injuries that would result from a direct hit on an opponent. The whole point was in the damage left on the shield of that strange guy from sand. It was clearly visible how the sound wave passed through it, gradually destroying the structure. Kami, if Gaara had not blocked this blow, you would definitely have gone to the doctors for a week even before the start of this exam. He continued to speak, smiling nervously, without even noticing that he had received several interested glances from nearby jounins and one angry Kage. Naruto swallowed cautiously, well remembering the slight hum and weak vibration that reached the girl when she, grouped, froze in anticipation of the dose's strike. Then the kunoichi did not pay much attention to all this, completely absorbed in the anticipation of brain-piercing pain, disorientation, and possibly complete loss of consciousness. But now, remembering that blow, she, throwing away everything else, perfectly felt all those emotions and feelings as if in reality. For what? That was all Naruto could ask, feeling some fear for Chuji's health and even life. This freak could easily really hurt him, or even kill him if he gets really angry. She spat, and abruptly breaking away from her father's arms, she forcefully grabbed Shikamaru by the shoulders, shaking him, literally forcing him to break away from the battle that was just beginning and look at himself. He is my best friend, but first of all, Chuji is a shinobi of the Hidden Leaf Village, Naruto, and is no different from you, or Lee, or even me, in his desire to win. The guy with an inscrutable face said dryly and abruptly, behaving like this with her for the first time, apparently trying to hide the same fear that the girl standing in front of him was experiencing at that moment. The kunoichi shuddered and sank, understanding and accepting that her friend was right. She, as always, decided to protect everyone and everything on her own, regardless of the personal desires of the people she saved, again doing what Kurama had been telling her for the second life not to do under any circumstances, hammering home simple truths about shinobi pride. Selfish, as the Nine Tails would say. I will not let the son of Chuza harm him beyond measure. Minato drawled reassuringly, having previously listened with interest to the spontaneous squabble of friends, mentally completely agreeing with the words of the child Shikaku, knowing full well about some of the bad character traits of his beloved daughter. By the way, underestimating a person so much, Naru, is a very bad basis for a long and strong friendship. He grinned fleetingly, with a slight movement of his hands turning both children, frozen in surprise, towards the arena, where Chuji, with the help of Byuban Baika no Jutsu, delivered powerful blows to the enemy, literally forcing him to only defend himself. And judging by his constrained movements and maneuvers, Dosa had a very hard time, especially considering his injuries. In addition, by the evil squint, in the literal sense of the word, scanning his opponent, the kunoichi immediately became clear that Chuji, using exclusively physical attacks, would definitely not defeat him. And given the fact that in the arsenal of the heir to the Akimichi clan, as far as Naruto herself knew, there were now only a couple of effective techniques Nikudan Sasha, with the help of which he could, perhaps, protect himself from the sound wave and Byuban no Jutsu, which, in fact, Chuji was fighting now, could have ended extremely badly. Since this technique of the Akimichi clan spent too much energy, and the result so far was practically zero, because besides the fact that he was strongly pressing Dosu, the guy had not yet caused any noticeable damage to him. As for his clan's Hiden-cho Modu, which Chuji used during their operation to return Sasuke, who had been on a bit of a spree with his enemies, to the village, this technique may not have been available to him yet, because discussing such things outside the clan, even with his closest friends, was a strict taboo among shinobi. In essence, based on these very thoughts, as well as from the noticeably tired expression on her friend's face, it was possible to draw a logical conclusion he would win only if Akimichi gave at least 200%. And, as if to confirm her thoughts, a deafening explosion thundered in the arena, forcing the girl to once again focus on the ensuing battle. Based on what he saw, Dosu, finally tired of evading, went on an open offensive, counterattacking the enemy with the help of his Kayamaizen. I'm not fat, I'm chubby! Chuji, who strangely evaded his attack, roared throughout the arena, most likely responding to the caustic words of Dosa that preceded the attack, which Naruto, completely lost in her thoughts, simply lost sight of, and then with even greater enthusiasm attacked the confused genin from sound. This time the blow finally went through, visibly hitting Dosu, apparently somehow damaging the massive device attached to the man's right arm. This is his chance. The kunoichi drawled in anticipation, leaning forward slightly to get a better look at what exactly pissed off King Yuta so much, while at the same time feeling her father's strong hands falling on her waist, ensuring her still weak carcass from another fall. Perhaps so, but a wounded animal always becomes even more dangerous. Kakashi, standing slightly to the left of him and his father, drawled moralizingly, to a dull consonant. From the younger Uchiha, who settled down next to his mentor. Don't underestimate Chuji, he responded with concentration to the Jonin's words. Shikamaru, without even turning his head in their direction. This guy has trained many times more than each member of our team since the academy, believing that he should be at the level of his first friends. He chuckled mockingly, clearly hinting at Naruto and Sasuke, who clearly stood out from the general background of the academy students, watching how skillfully the one who was considered clumsy and slow in childhood avoided the furious attacks of his opponent. From the outside, it gradually began to seem that Dosu, after what had happened, had finally gone on the offensive, completely abandoning any defense, for which he would obviously soon pay with a loss. A couple more of the same precise blows, the kunoichi said enthusiastically, greatly surprised by Shikamaru's words and their true meaning. Honestly, to her sincere shame, Naren knew absolutely nothing about Chuji's efforts, just as she did not know whether he had done something similar in her previous life. But the way this guy now moved, dodged, attacked and blocked made a truly indelible impression, because knowing Chuji from the very first year of the academy, she understood well what it took for him to achieve such a result less than a year after graduation. I hope he has enough strength for this. Noticing that Akimichi was beginning to slow down slightly, she immediately drawled out, slightly worried. The one who is more resilient will win this battle. Minato said quite unexpectedly, it seems, like his daughter, sincerely interested in the fight. This man from Sound Village is as exhausted as Chuza's son, he continued to say with concentration, while the genin around him looked at each other and looked curiously at the head of the village, who for the first time that evening was openly commenting on someone's fight. On top of everything, you can clearly see how annoyed he is because he is giving in under the pressure of some teenager. The Hokage chuckled slightly disappointedly, clearly expecting something more from Dosu, because in the arena Chuji's opponent was finally losing ground, due to his imprudence, finding himself sandwiched in the far corner, without the opportunity to escape from the next blow coming at him. All this, coupled with his exorbitant ego, damnably prevents this man from concentrating normally and soberly assessing the situation as a whole. The Hokage said dryly, watching with some pride the estranged heir of the Akimichi clan, who in the future promises to become an excellent jonin and support the village and the next Hokage. For some reason, he had absolutely no doubt that by that time his post, as well as all concerns about Naruto, would be transferred to Kakashi. And, as if to confirm Minato's words, Chuji carried out another series of 3 crushing blows, hitting the solar plexus, face and right arm, completely incapacitating Kayamaizen and literally driving Dosu into the wall. It was such an unexpected ending to the last battle of the qualifying stage that for several seconds a dead silence hung in the hall, diluted only by the heavy breathing of the winner of the last battle. No one expected that a young guy who had barely graduated from the Shinobi Academy would so quickly win a battle with a man who was almost twice as old and far more experienced than many of the genin participating in this exam. Actually, after this moment of confusion, the entire space of the hall was literally filled with an explosion of whistles, applause, and loud enthusiastic screams. Chuji, as if not believing what was happening, looked around and, looking again at his passed-out opponent, slowly sliding down the wall along with the concrete crumble, smiled broadly, looking at where his friends and mentor stood. "Give me meat!" Akimichi shouted loudly, raising his fist, causing loud laughter from those who knew him well enough. So, the qualifying matches for the 3rd stage of the Chunin exam are over. Hade cleared his throat, surprisingly, with his own words shouting over the entire hubbub of voices that filled the hall after Chuji's victory. Everyone who has passed this stage and is allowed to the main battles, please line up in front of the Hokage of the Hidden Leaf Village, he said measuredly, looking back at the statue of hands folded in a sheep seal, where the head of Konoha was already standing proudly on a small pedestal. Naruto chuckled mockingly at this performance and looked back, right behind her, where just recently her father stood and quietly chuckled at what was happening. His bodyguard Shursui towered with a wide smile, ready to escort the winners down. Or more precisely, the nurse left by Minato in order to monitor the safety of his daughter, who today strives to plow a couple of meters of concrete with her long nose. However, now this was a rather controversial fact, because Nera perfectly felt that her strength and chakra had strangely slightly recovered again. Although the fact that she so stupidly missed the moment when her father released her from his warm arms and disappeared from the balcony suggested that this was a temporary effect obtained with the feasible help of Chakra Minato. But how he managed to do what Kurama often did for her remained a big question for the girl, to which she longed to get an answer. Well, my little Heim, let's go. The guy smiled at her with his signature smile, which made almost half of the women in Konoha go crazy. However, Nera had a strong immunity to this smile, whose name was Kakashi. Well, and not the least role in all this was played by the kunoichi's clear awareness of what a wonderful sense of humor this wonderful individual has. I, as a faithful subordinate of Hokage-sama, am simply obliged to escort his beloved daughter downstairs. Meanwhile, mockingly, with a slight but clearly noticeable irony in his voice, the eldest of the three surviving Uchihas literally sang, clearly hinting at her semi-fainting state after defeating Kiba. However, instead of an answer, he was only rewarded with a cold, contemptuous snort and the contemplation of the quickly retreating blonde top of her head, surrounded, like a convoy, by a couple of strong genin from her class. Oh, come on, Naru, you know perfectly well that it was just a little innocent joke, he drawled ingratiatingly, and, as if having come to his senses, rushed after the girl, as most often, completely ignoring the curious glances gathered at him. I know. She extremely dryly agreed with his words, to Sasuke's suspiciously mocking chuckle and Shikamaru's muffled chuckles. But this is by no means a reason to forgive your disgusting jokes, which have once again brought me into disrepute, Shursui. Stopping abruptly on the first step of the stairs, the kunoichi drawled sarcastically, exactly copying the signature tone of her tailed tenant. What an idiot you are, Naru. Sincerely hoping that he, wherever he was, would see this and appreciate her innocent revenge on his favorite among the Uchiha. By the way, a couple of those accompanying her, having appreciated the kind of frightened and at the same time sad apologetic expression on the face of Naruto's interlocutor, were already openly laughing at what was happening. Cruel. But, as usual, strictly and factually. With a heavy sigh, the girl's older friend responded a little offendedly, catching up with the genin who continued on their way. At the same time, with his words, he shoved the younger Uchiha somewhere to the side in retaliation, because of which the brunette gave a strangled grunt and immediately fell silent. By the way, my dear Heim, you were simply incredibly charming during your fight. Glancing cautiously at Hatake, who remained on the balcony, he added enthusiastically, instantly making Naruto blush with his words. And, judging by Shursui's extremely ambiguous grin, he meant either the girl's battle itself and her insidious plan, or hinting at the blonde's form, slightly embellished by her with the help of Oiroku no Jutsu. That guy with the puppy didn't stand a chance against your tactics. He immediately laughed good-naturedly, as if explaining what exactly he meant when he uttered the previous phrase, as if he was not trying to veilingly mock her. Who would doubt it? Shikamaru sarcastically said instead of his friend, clearly hinting at his too clumsy attempt to get out, and picking up Naruto by the elbow, persistently pulled her towards the genin who had already passed this qualifying round, already lined up in a line. Thank you. Contrary to the words of his friend, the kunoichi smiled warmly at him, turning around, led by Shika forward, under the displeased grumbling of Sasuke walking next to them, accepting his friend's praise. You have all earned the right to participate in the final stage of the Chunin exam. As soon as the last three genin lined up, Hate, standing next to Anko and Ibiki, a little to the right of the Hokage, said loudly, "Congratulations." The examiner said a little louder, to to the consonant nods of a couple of his colleagues and loud applause and encouraging shouts from the rest of those present, trying to cheer up their past comrades and wards. "Hokage-sama, I asked you." When the noise died down a little, turning to the head of the village, Hate said with a slight bow, giving him the floor. "Yes." Minato nodded briefly, taking a step forward, thanks to his elevation, towering over the 9 genin frozen in front of him with a menacing figure. "As I said earlier, everyone will see our main battles." He spoke measuredly after a short pause in a firm, but at the same time damnably warm and deep voice, collecting absolutely all attention on his person. Naruto, having completely relaxed for the first time in the last 5 days, smiled sunnily, listening to such a dear and beloved voice, without particularly delving into the meaning of the words themselves, so beautifully knowing what exactly her father wanted to convey to them. And to be honest, she had already decided to spend all the time allocated to prepare for the last stage in hard training, wanting to fight with Niji, in addition to freeing Kurama and part of his power, to shake off at least a couple of new techniques from Jiraiya. Well, or to finally master Sannin Mudo. The question was whether her godfather would agree to become a mentor for the restless kunoichi and whether her father would allow them this adventure. But be that as it may, he will definitely have nowhere to go. He won't train her himself. So that you can finally come to your senses and fully recover, it was decided to hold the last stage of the exam in exactly a month. He finished a little louder, which is why the kunoichi abruptly emerged from her thoughts, which had already floated towards her future proceedings with the 9 tails. Still, no matter how you look at it, their plan, despite the huge number of reservations and subparagraphs, completely failed. Yes, Orochimaru was initially not at all the opponent that Naruto could cope with alone even at the end of the 4th Shinobi World War. What can we say about her current capabilities? But despite this, she still had a chance to win, albeit small. And it doesn't matter that for this the kunoichi had to literally turn inside out and, in the literal sense of the word, risk his life and the life of Kurama. They both knew perfectly well what they were getting into, developing a plan for the most extreme of all possible cases. Of course, each of the finalists should spend this time usefully analyze the techniques and capabilities of their opponent, and naturally, become stronger. This time the Hokage explained with a slight smile, looking many times softer than at the beginning of his speech. Which, once again, was completely inconsistent for many with the image of a stern shinobi, the hero of the last war, well known throughout the shinobi world as the Yellow Lightning of Konoha. However, his previous performance in a not entirely sober state, before the second stage of the exam, had already significantly shaken the young minds of the younger generation of shinobi. Therefore, such drastic changes went off with a bang, especially among the genin of the Hidden Leaf Village, involuntarily causing reciprocal smiles on the faces of the participants who passed by. That's all. More precisely, almost everything. As if he had just remembered something, Minato grinned slyly, completely falling out of the role of a strict Kage, which caused an ironic laugh from his beloved daughter, who clearly did not appreciate his way of communicating with the genin. And it doesn't matter that everyone who passed this time was still quite green youths, and even most of them were from his native village. Today we must draw lots to distribute the pairs for the final battle. Seeing the surprise on the faces of the genin, the blonde explained, at the same time, with a slight wave of his hand, inviting Mitarashi, holding in her hands a large cube with a round hole on its upper edge, to come forward. Take out one piece of paper with a serial number from the box that Anko is holding. I'll go around everyone myself, the woman said quickly and incredibly sternly, contrary to the tone of the Hokage, seeing a suspicious movement in the line. Wait for your turn. She chuckled, heading towards its left edge, where a thoughtful Naruto stood between Sasuke and Shikamaru. Take one at a time, she said, handing the box to the Uchiha who stood first in the line, receiving in response a frowning look that screamed that he, unlike the woman who said this, was not a complete idiot. Actually, what happened next was no different from the previous life of the kunoichi, including the number that she got during the lottery. If everyone has received their number, say it out loud one by one. Minato spoke again, nodding to Ibiki, who was standing with a large black tablet in his hands. 8. Shika said lazily, crumpling the paper and stuffing it into his shorts pocket. 1. Nera chuckled, echoing her friend, carelessly crumpling the piece of paper in her hands. 4. Sasuke said dryly. 10. Chuji said more cheerfully than one would expect from the last one to finish the battle. 5. Temari said right after him. 7. Her older brother echoed her. 3. Gaara responded without any emotion. 2. Neji said, closing his eyes, to Naruto's imperceptible exhalation, still a little worried about the next draw and the changed number of participants in it. 6. Shino, who was standing last, quietly scolded. So one of those girls will have number 9. Ibiki said quietly, making some notes, who had previously been methodically writing something down on his tablet. And now you will learn the order of battles, the Hokage said loudly with a slight smile, completely ignoring the exclamations and questions of the genin that rained down like from a cornucopia after his words. Ibiki, show them the diagram. The only thing Minato added. Eat. Their first examiner immediately responded, coming forward, a little closer to the lined-up exam participants, and unfolded his tablet. On the white sheet was a standard tournament staircase with 10 paths, opposite which, in accordance with serial numbers, were written the names of the participants in the last stage of the Chunin exam. In theory, if everything had gone as planned initially, in his second battle, Naruto would have clashed with Gaara in his past life. Which, roughly speaking, happened, but under slightly different, worse circumstances. Then, again, given that she still defeated Gaara, there would have been a fight with one of the older children of the Kazekage. But what happened, and by chance and one vile snake Sannin, Suna decided to attack her eternal enemy Konoha, disrupting the final exam. Now, everything was simpler and more difficult at the same time, because some couples and circumstances had changed. So, for example, Chuji had to fight either Sakura or Ino. Temari and Kankuro strangely swapped places, which is why the outcome of the battle and the exam for Shikamaru, the only one who passed it last time, was completely incomprehensible. The fight between Gaara and Sasuke also promised to be more interesting, and Naruto really hoped for it, without any disruptions. Well, as Kurama would say, think, first of all, about your battle. The kunoichi chuckled to herself, throwing her shock of golden curls over her shoulder, while briefly glancing at her future opponent, who was smiling. Neji seemed genuinely happy about this distribution. But not like the last time, wanting to get even with the loser who imagined herself to be the one who could break her fate and get ahead. It seemed that the member of the Hugo clan was simply glad that he would fight with her. Just like that, without any subtext or proof of anything to his opponent, as if it was not she who an hour earlier had been telling him about the idiocy of his judgments and childhood grievances. Naruto blinked and turned away, making a mental note to think about it sometime in her spare time and discuss it with Kurama upon his return, along with the cage, to their rightful place in her inner world. Now you can finally relax or start planning and training, Minato solemnly said, clapping his hands to attract attention, thereby announcing the official end of the qualifying stage. But catching himself, he added, "Or does anyone else have any questions?" "I have, Hokage-sama." Raising his hand, the heir of the Nara clan said, making the blonde standing next to her, who was already thinking about her future battle, flinch with his clear and loud voice, and, having received an encouraging nod from the head of the village, he continued, "Here, as in any tournament, there will also be only one winner," he said thoughtfully, in a tone as if he was trying to understand whether the game was worth the candle. "So, only one genin will become a chunin?" Shikamaru finished his thought, to the agreeable nods of the others and the tired look of Naruto, who had already raised her leg towards her father, so that she could be carried home and finally allowed to sleep and eat properly. "Not at all," the Hokage said with a wide smile, pleased that at least one of the genin thought of asking this question. "The judges will be me, the Kazekage, the daimyo who hire shinobi to carry out various missions, and other leaders," he said measuredly. "During battles, we will evaluate your abilities. Those who have the appropriate skills will become chunin," he finished, receiving instead of an answer a nod from the son of his personal assistant, who is already promising to become worthy of the Naruto Shinobi clan. They will be able to get this title even if they lose in the first match, he added, wanting to clarify all the nuances at once. Does this mean that everyone present can become Chunin? Temari asked in surprise, seemingly not believing that the Hokage's words were true. You're right, but it also means that perhaps no one will be elected at all. Minato spread his hands, noticing how the girl, the eldest daughter of the race, shuddered. Therefore, moving up the standings gives you more chances to impress the judges. He smiled, gesturing to the tablet with that same table still facing the genin. Well, since there are no more questions, thank you for your persistent battles, and see you in a month at the third stage of the exam, Chapter 48 Jiraiya, or Return of Kurama. Steaming mugs of freshly brewed jasmine tea, standing in simple gray cups on a slightly faded orange tablecloth in front of a calm Hokage, a wary jounin and a stern genin, involuntarily made all three think about an extremely serious conversation. Naruto, who brewed this wonderful tea, as if to confirm these thoughts, folded her arms on her chest and stood in front of the table with a frown, glaring at her father and mentor with an incredibly offended look. However, after everything that happened at the qualifying stage, she was no longer at all angry that these two simply ignored her request for help before the fight, considering the girl's behavior some strange whim. But still, somewhere deep inside Naruto's heart, where that same lonely orphan, intimidated by everyone and absolutely unaccepted by society, still lived, that same unpleasant aftertaste still remained because of their indifferent behavior. Minato and Kakashi in this life were the people closest to her, who so easily turned away in a moment of her despair, and she didn't care that these two knew nothing about it. This thought, like some kind of obsession, terribly weighed on the girl, like some vile worm gnawing into her very heart, making her seriously think that what Mizuki had said long ago was in the heat of hatred and contempt for the entire leaf. The words were partly true. Too sad and terribly funny at the same time. After all, Naru could do absolutely nothing with this vile feeling. Somewhere on an intuitive level she wanted to prick, shame, and hurt them in revenge. Without Kurama, I simply cannot deal with this damn worm. Minato, in response to the strange behavior, somehow looked blankly at his daughter, who now reminded him of some strict teacher, once again scolding malicious hooligans. This, to some extent, admired Naruto so strong, mature, and, more than ever, similar to his beloved Kushina. This little girl was simply amazing at how much she had matured over the last 6 months of being a shinobi. However, to be honest, his daughter always seemed to him too mature, reasonable, and collected, as if she had already been born with an adult consciousness. Actually, the man saw absolutely no reason to be angry with himself specifically, sincerely believing that, unlike the stupid Kakashi, he certainly did not give reasons for this. That's why Minato felt just great. Although, in his humble opinion, having so brilliantly passed the first 2 stages of the 3 exams, Naru, with a calm soul, could have forgiven her jealous lover, simply letting go of this stupid situation with Guy and all this misunderstanding. Contrary to the thoughts of his sensei, Kakashi was not so sacredly sure that he was the only one who had offended Naruto this time. However, the man also doubted that the consequence of this was precisely the misunderstanding that had developed between them. And especially, given the indisputable fact that Naru has always been famous not only for her prudence and understanding, but also for a certain rancor. But the true reason for the anger and resentment of his first student Hitaki, even taking into account all the time he spent with her, alas, he did not know at all. Naru, my sunshine, can you explain to me and Kakashi why we are not celebrating your successes in Ichiraka now, but are sitting here as if being interrogated by Ibiki? Minato spoke softly, breaking the silence, which caused his student to flinch imperceptibly and glance incredulously at his smiling sensei. The blonde, frowning even deeper, forbade herself to agree with her parents' words until that wonderful moment when they finally solved all their problems, including the return of the Ninetales to their rightful place. Because, whatever one may say, she absolutely did not want to continue living with these vile and incredibly stupid thoughts. No, Dad! The girl immediately snapped back dryly. First, I would like to tell you two in more detail about my battle with Orochimaru in the Forest of Death. Finally sitting down at the table, this time Naruto continued speaking measuredly, carefully picking up her mug, while concentrating all her attention on it, so as not to see the faces of her interlocutors for some time. Kakashi, hearing this, lowered his head into his hands, resting his elbows on his knees, feeling the lion's share of his guilt in everything that happened. After all, if he had been a little more attentive, a little more sober and not so fixated on his chaotic feelings, perhaps he could have noticed the chakra sanina among the crowd of genin. Minato, in contrast, did not even change his face, listening carefully to his little copy, with the last of his strength restraining his hellish anger at everyone who was in any way connected with this incident. I struck him using the scarlet cloak of nine-tailed fox chakra. Gathering her thoughts and looking up, the blonde said evenly, nervously twirling the scalding hot mug in her hands, perfectly seeing how abruptly her father's face became gloomy, becoming many times more serious. But it didn't have any effect on him at all. Orochimaru, he just grinned in surprise at my attempt, and summoned some kind of huge snake. Naruto said slightly mockingly, with notes of some hysteria, gradually approaching the very essence of her short story. Therefore I, having thought about it, decided to try my luck with the Rasengan and the technique of the God of Thunder. Putting down the mug, she said emotionally, as if she was trying to prove something to her interlocutors, but was interrupted by a sharp blow of her palm on the table, because of which all three of the mugs shook, and large wet stains from the tea spilled on him spread across the tablecloth. You should have just run away from there. Kakashi completely unexpectedly barked throughout the kitchen, glaring at his first student, whom, despite all his feelings and affection, at the moment he most wanted to strangle. I will not run away from danger, leaving my comrades to be torn to pieces by the Sannin. Clenching her hands into fists, the blonde retorted in the same tone, blue eyes sparkling in response. You could take them with you. With a stern remark, Minato inserted himself into their quarrel, this time being completely on Hataki's side. Naruto blinked and glared at her father, realizing that, technically speaking, he was completely right. But they would have run far from this damned snake, considering that Sasuke was his original target. Do you really think that the three of us could really run far away from Orochimaru himself? Arching a thin white eyebrow, the girl ironically asked, trying to think what exactly she was saying now, because theoretically, given her fainting and the silence of the younger Uchiha, she certainly could not know the real reason for the appearance of the village traitor in the exam. However, it doesn't matter, it already happened, and we survived even after the battle with this psycho. Naruto completely unexpectedly gave up on all this, simply not wanting to further develop this topic, especially without his faithful advisor. Minato only nodded at her words, preparing to hear the true essence of his daughter's story, quietly placing his hand on the shoulder of the student, who quietly snorted some unintelligible curse at her words. In general, he, having recognized the kunai with seals on the winding, literally caught me by the hand, not allowing me to make the last blow with the Rasengan on that huge snake. Leaning back in the chair, the blonde said sadly, remembering that very moment piercing the snake eyes of a Sannin tightly gripping her wrist with a beautiful scarlet iridescent sphere and wild fear and rejection of what was happening raging inside her along with Kurama shouting some curses. But the worst thing was when the blonde felt something warm and slimy touching her fragile neck, slowly wrapping around her, gradually squeezing her soul. At the same time, Orochimaru let go of Neru's hand, and enjoying the wheezing of the victim, allowed her to hang briefly in the air as if on some kind of gallows. The girl shrugged her shoulders and swallowed the lump that had lodged in her throat and was preventing her from taking a free breath, and looked at the men in front of himself, well aware of the cold sweat appearing on his forehead. What exactly did he do to you? That's all Minato asked, in such a tone that it immediately became clear that if Orochimaru was caught, he would only have to live until the Leaf Hokage appeared before him. Actually, it was by looking at the faces of Minato and Kakashi that Naruto realized that all these memories and sensations were perfectly reflected on her face, simply terribly frightening both her beloved and her father. Without going into too much detail, he blocked yours with his seal, Dad, completely blocking all the flows of chakra in my body. the blonde said, closing her eyes, with a strange smile, knowing full well that if she told them absolutely everything, it would end with these two going together today to search for Orochimaru with the goal of killing him. And then, without allowing either Minato or Kakashi to open their mouths, she continued. That's why, during the intermediate stage, I was so worried about the lack of my pouch, which contained ready-made seals and my kunai with marks. That is, the blonde's father said, turning pale, realizing the deplorable situation in which his daughter found herself at that moment, and the truth of his son Shikaku's words that Naru was afraid of that boy with the puppy. Yes, Dad, I spent all my chakra, betting everything on only the last 3 blows. She smiled caustically, wanting to close this topic, because the guilty pugs of her dad and mentor at that moment were beyond all expectations. You should have told us earlier, Hatake said sadly. And what would it change? Naruto remarked reasonably. You still wouldn't be able to help me somehow, because this is contrary to the rules of the exam. The girl smiled warmly at him, feeling some relief because she had expressed everything and how exactly they reacted to her story. Everything is fine, I'm alive and I even won, so do something with my seal and let's go celebrate, the blonde sang joyfully, trying to break the gloomy atmosphere that she herself had previously created. Come here and show me your seal. It appeared after Orochimaru's intervention? Having digested everything his daughter said, Minato said thoughtfully, roughly imagining what exactly this man did to his baby and what it threatens them with. Naruto immediately stood up, silently walked up to her father, and completely oblivious to Kakashi's presence, without a second thought unbuttoned her black tunic, revealing to everyone a view of milky pale skin and a short black top covering only her chest. Minato frowned as he pulled his skirt down slightly, fully revealing his sunken stomach with the black spiral markings of his own seal, on top of which were the 5 curls of Gogyo's seal. Fuin. Actually, as he thought, Orochimaru distorted the hack no Fuin seal's cheeky, placing an odd seal on top of an even one, thus creating an imbalance. That's why Nara decided that her chakra was blocked, although this was not entirely true. Originally, the seal of the 8 trigrams was supposed to allow a small part of the fox's chakra to pass through, allowing her chakra to mix with it. Now this connection was completely destroyed, so Naruto could not even properly control her own chakra, as if it did not exist at all. Kakashi, just look at this. The blonde snorted irritably, moving slightly to the side so that the student could look at the resulting disgrace. After all, he himself taught him some simple seals and basic rules, so Hatake should have understood the irony of the Sanin's act. But the girl herself, only realizing her father's words, squealed in fear and, snatching the belt of her skirt from Minato's hands, wrapped her tunic tightly around her, while blushing as red as a ripe tomato. Dad! She hissed hysterically, piercing her parent with an indignant gaze. But as soon as she glanced in the direction of her mentor, she saw her exact reflection. Kakashi, blushing like a boiled lobster, simply looked at the ceiling, as if he was not there at all. Stop looking at it, just fix everything the way it was. Or better yet, weaken your seal a little so that I can use the chakra of the 9-tailed fox more. Naruto growled, burning with shame, watching her father chuckle quietly, looking from her to his student and back, mentally thanking all the gods that Kurama was now temporarily absent. There is one small problem here, sunshine. The man smiled good-naturedly and warmly, as only he could, looking at how his daughter stared at him in surprise with a silent question in her eyes. How is this possible? The fact is that this seal was put by Orochimaru, one of the 3 legendary Sanin's Konoha, and if I try to take it off, I can only make it worse. Minato drawled apologetically, watching as Naruto pouted, then exhaled sharply, and turning away, began to straighten her tunic. I think we need to contact Jiraiya-sensei with her, he is better versed in everything related to his former comrades. The blonde said thoughtfully, and taking a sip from his mug of cool tea, added, just where to look for him now. Then I would like it to be him who trained me before the 3rd stage. The girl immediately came to life, quickly turning to her interlocutors, mentally rejoicing that everything was working out so well, because Jiraiya should be in Konoha right now. However, Given all the changes that have occurred in history recently, he could now be anywhere at all. Sounded a sensible thought in Neru's head, for some reason in Kurama's ironic voice. I thought you would want me to train you, Kakashi responded in surprise, seeming to have just recovered from their recent conversation. Aren't you going to deal with Sasuke? The girl inquired with a raised eyebrow, clearly remembering how in a past life he simply sent her to Ebisu-sensei, precisely because he wanted to get closely involved with the last Uchiha and his condition. Actually, this is a rather interesting idea, because I sent Itachi on Orochimaru's trail, and Shursui now has a lot of work. Minato said thoughtfully, interrupting Hatake, who was already ready to answer something. You can now give Sasuke much more than Neru, and she might just need what the Sannin teaches her. The man continued to think out loud, casting a thoughtful glance at his little joyful copy. Well, if you think so, Minato-sama. Kakashi nodded at his proposal, not entirely happy with his decision, but simply not daring to object, because the Hokage was indeed right about something. Well, now let's celebrate, the blonde asked loudly, clapping his hands, rising from his chair, looking at his thoughtful children with a cheerful look. Naruto walked down the street with a wide smile, moving a little ahead of her father and mentor who were talking. The girl's mood was simply great, even despite the fact that Kurama was still unavailable, and due to the lack of chakra, the condition of the blonde herself left much to be desired. Slowly running up a small wooden bridge, Neru spun on the spot, catching a glimpse of her companions not far away, furiously arguing about something, and not paying attention to the sidelong glances of those around her, ran to the other side, going exactly to the hot springs, from which it was only a short distance from Ichiraku, no more than a couple of 100 meters and a couple more of the same bridges. Then, with her hands behind her head, the girl, still smiling, slowly moved towards the bridge she needed, thus giving her father and Kakashi the opportunity to catch up. But as soon as she was in the middle of the second bridge, the blonde froze in her tracks, accidentally noticing at the back wall of the women's baths a damn familiar figure with long white hair that was tied with an elastic band into a tight, low ponytail. This old man, like some kind of maniac, was squatting, clinging to the wall made of wooden beams and giggling strangely, looking at that moment more disgusting than ever. Naruto, hiding her smile, exhaled and closed her eyes, trying to understand how alcoholics and psychopaths with delusions of grandeur became the legendary Sannin of the Hidden Leaf Village, who inspired fear even in some Kage. However, her own team, who in a sense replaced them in this honorable position, did not go so far, given the fact that all three were their students. Neru? Minato's surprised voice rang out right above the blonde's ear, causing her to flinch and turn around sharply. Why are you standing here? He quickly asked, to which the daughter nodded towards his sensei, who was literally stuck to the wall of the female half of the hot springs. The man, following her gesture in the same way as she, sighed heavily, seeming to have become accustomed to such antics from his mentor. Isn't this Jiraiya-sama? Kakashi asked out loud, also looking in that direction, seemingly not believing that one of the legendary Sannin could fall so low by spying on women in the bathhouse. But no one had time to answer him, because some shinobi rushed at him with a loud, indignant cry, for which he instantly received a huge toad tongue in the face, going straight into a life-saving knockout. Further, Jiraiya, sitting on the head of this toad in an extremely pathetic pose, with a serious face, uttered something vaguely reminiscent of strong indignation, finally losing face in the eyes of the three spectators of this small performance. Let's just pretend we don't know him, Naruto suggested quietly, with an ironic laugh, remembering those terrible 2 years that she spent with this man as a mentor. No, of course, Jiraiya was an excellent teacher, an attentive adult, replacing the little girl abandoned by everyone since childhood Naruto Uzumaki parents. But the way he periodically raked money from her wallet for his entertainment, sat with some cheeky girls all night in restaurants, doing all this in front of the child, was a truly terrible experience for her. However, Naruto became what she is solely thanks to Jiraiya and his care, and only he could free Kurama, so… I think he's already noticed us. Feeling a slight mockery in his daughter's tone, Minato responded, restrainedly waving to his former mentor. The blonde shouted loudly, unlike her father, energetically waving at the surprised man, attracting absolutely everyone's gaze. At your age, you actually get imprisoned for something like this, and the Hokage is there as a witness. She laughed cheerfully, watching as the toad disappeared with a loud poof, and the Sannin, at the speed of light, was approaching their company right through the water, wanting to shut her mouth as soon as possible. I'm a writer, just peeping gives me the inspiration I need. He literally hissed with an angry and at the same time doomed look, finding himself exactly opposite Naruto and looking up at her. Good afternoon, Jiraiya-sama? Kakashi greeted politely, the only one observing all the boundaries of decency in front of the Sannin. But of course, my dear. The man waved him off, easily jumping onto the bridge, where he was immediately grabbed into a tight embrace by the thin arms of his goddaughter. Hello, Minato. He nodded dejectedly to the student, not even trying to get out of the blonde's grip. You just can't imagine how you got here in time. Meanwhile, the girl spoke, looking up from her godfather's broad shoulders, looking with some admiration at such a familiar face, feeling immense joy. You will train me before the third stage of the Chunin exam. She sang easily, as if everything had already been decided long ago, and the Sannin not only agreed to this, but himself offered to become her personal mentor. And I also need to fix my seal a little. Without letting anyone open her mouth, she quickly continued, simply lifting up her tunic so that a patch of skin with the seals of her father and Orochimaru was visible. Actually, the only thing she was thinking about at that moment was a quick meeting with Kurama and the upcoming exam final, where she would one way or another have to fight Neji and, possibly, Gaara. Naruto, Minato said, closing his eyes in a quiet, somehow defeated tone, looking at what his daughter was doing right in the middle of the street and Jiraiya's complete lack of understanding of what was happening. Come on, concentrate all your chakra in the center of your spiral seal. Meanwhile, the Sannin commanded, completely ignoring the behavior of the Hokage and the attentive gaze of the copying ninja. Naruto, obeying the words of her godfather, folded her hands in the seal of a sheep and closed her eyes, concentrating. But, as she thought, absolutely nothing happened, because her chakra simply refused to obey its owner. I see, this is Orochimaru's work, isn't it? He said thoughtfully, still looking at the black patterns on his goddaughter's body. Naru, quickly raise your arms up and tighten your stomach harder, Jiraiya said, gathering his chakra at his fingertips to remove the seal of his old comrade. The blonde nodded without question and immediately followed his order, expecting, as last time, severe pain that would permeate her entire body to the very last cell. Actually, she didn't have to wait long. As soon as Jiraiya's warm fingers touched the cool skin on Naruto's stomach, she felt like she was electrocuted, as if being pierced by a Chidori again Kakashi, and then Naru completely shamefully passed out, feeling a treacherous weakness throughout her whole body and a painfully familiar booming laugh, beating like an alarm bell right at her temples.